first thing I want to talk about is something called submission notifications. So you go ahead and you create a form, you send out the form, right? You send out the link for people to complete the form, and then you don't know what happens, right? Oh, and maybe you remember a week later, I put out that form. I need to go look at it because you're not like me. I'm one of those people who like constantly checks the form. So if you need a reminder to check the form, you can actually set this up within Google Forms very easily. You can set it up so that you automatically get an email notification for any new responses. Really super easy and simple. Let me just go ahead and show that to you real quick. So basically it's under, so there are two sides to Google Forms, right? There's the question side, and that's where you write your questions and edit your questions. And then there's a responses side, and that has anything to do with responses. So when you click on the kebab, remember the three dots, it's called the kebab. Well, it is here. So, and then you come here, very top, it says get email notifications for new responses. You just click on that. I get a check mark in front of it. So now every time someone responds, I'll get an email. Now,
Okay. Excuse me,
that
one
might
second.
be something that you don't want to deal with.
This is Araceli. Can you make it a little bit bigger, please? It's really hard to see on the screen. If you could.
Oh, okay. I will see what I can do. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you click here.
Yes.
And then you have to click here where it says get email notifications for new responses. All right. So that way you get an email. Now, the problem with that is that might get to be a bit much. So you have to decide whether or not you want that. But just so you know, and I do put that here in the presentation, I do want you to know, this is going to drive me crazy. I need to fix this. Okay. I just want, it does go into the updates category of your email. You know how your email has different updates? You have your main inbox, and then you have like kind of more junkier mail goes to notifications, but also what goes into the notifications are the emails that tell you that you got someone put something into the form. Okay. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for them. So if it goes in that box, it's like kind of no big deal. Okay. The other side of this is there's something called response receipts. So you may want to get an email saying that someone filled in your form, but for the other people, the people who are actually filling in the form, it's nice for them to know that it's a reminder that they filled in the form. So the only thing with that is you cannot have an anonymous form and have people and have them get a response receipt, because you need to collect the email address. When you collect the email address, it's no longer an anonymous form. So keep that in mind, right? If you want it to be 100% anonymous, you're going to not have the email address turned on, the collecting email address thing turned on, okay? But when you turn that part off, collect email addresses, the response receipts thing goes away. So I'm just going to tell you up front, if this is an anonymous form that you're creating, you're not going to be able to do this at all. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm not going to go over it right now, but it is really important. Like sometimes, have you ever noticed that someone gives out a form and people say, I can't get into it? It's because they're not logged into their WCC USD account. So that's always a good reminder. If you're the person who sent out the form and they email you back and say, I can't get into this form, you can let them know, okay, you're probably not signed into your account correctly. Okay, so that's the answer to that one. Because if you have it set up where it requires sign in and restrict it to WCC USD, they have to be logged in Chrome with their WCC USD account. So please keep that in mind. You can also make it, it's kind of nice, you can make it so that they can edit what they put into the form after they submit it, right? Which is really nice. So you can do that as well. Okay. So there were a couple of questions. The first one was your name. Okay, we'll not talk about that one. That one's easy, right? That's just a short answer. So there are two question types that are a little more complicated. And you would have to figure out how you would do this. I gave you an example of how I would use the multiple choice grid. Honestly, I don't use them very often, but I use them enough that they help me out a lot. So multiple choice grid, I have on the left the edit view, right, which is the form editor's view. on the right side, I have what's called the live view, which is what it looks like in an actual Google form. So you have to keep in mind, got to remember rows and columns, rows and columns. Rows go across, columns, just like with a building, up and down, right? You have to keep that in mind. So you have to kind of get into your head and try to visualize what this is going to look like. So as you can see, I've got the rows. These are the names of the rows, Gmail, G Calendar, it's all the apps. That's going right this way. They're going this way. The columns are the way that you would rate them. So the whole idea was that you had to rate them in order of importance, in your opinion, right? 1 being the most important app, 7 being the least important app. Okay, so only 1 could be a 1, only 1 could be a 2, only 1 could be a 3. It doesn't have to be that way. Okay, I did require a response in each row, right? This is all in editing. I did require a response in each row. That's the first thing I did, so that you would have to give each one of them a rating. And then the other piece is that I limited each response to only 1 response per column. Okay, meaning you could, every single column, you could only put 1, which means only 1 could be 1, only 1 could be 2, only 1 could be 3, right? So that when if you were to complete it and you looked down the columns, you would see only 1 dot filled in for each column. I also did shuffle row order, which you can go, that's up to you. I just did that for fun, but that just means that these rows were reshuffled for every single person. Why is that useful? That is very useful when someone is giving a quiz. So that the person, back when we're live and sitting next to each other, that means that it's not as easy for the person to kind of go, look over, because if you shuffle them, it makes it a little more difficult. Okay, so that's the multiple choice grid. Very confusing name. I get it. Multiple choice makes it feel like, oh, well, I can choose many things. No, it just means that you have multiple choices and you only get 1. You can only choose 1. Okay. Checkbox grid. This is a little bit different. So let me show you something really quickly. Multiple choice grid has circles. Checkbox grid has squares. That's one way that you know when you're in a form and you're filling it out, what you can do with it. Because generally speaking, check boxes means you can pick more than 1. Okay, that's generally how it works. So for instance, this is, so same thing, same kind of setup, rows and columns, but you can pick any number of these, right? You could have picked all 4 of them if you wanted. Again, I did require a response in each row. So you did have to fill out something for each row. And then you needed to shuffle. I did shuffle row order again. Again, what's that for? Quizzes. That's what it's for, honestly. I don't think it's really for anything else. I could have limited to 1 response per column, which is what I did with the multiple choice one, but I decided no, that doesn't work for this, right? So I allowed you to, you could have checked all 4 if you wanted in each row. So that's the checkbox grid. So that's the difference between the 2 of them. And this knowing, you just have to know, right, that when you click on the kebab, you get these different choices. Okay. Response validation. So this is something where, for instance, if you ask someone to put in an email address, you can make sure that their answer you can make it so that their answer includes an at wccusd.net or something like that, because you can make it so that it says that it has to be an email address. So I'm actually going to show you this part. And this can get very fancy and complicated. I did give you an example of that. So I'm going to go into the question side, not the responses side. So as you can see, there's nothing here about responses. I don't see any responses here. These are all the questions. This is where I would make changes to questions. So I'm going to use this one actually. I click on the question itself to make any changes. And I'm going to click on the 3 dots here, right? The kebab. And I'm going to click on response validation. So let's say that I wanted to make sure let's say that I asked for an email address here. I'm not going to mess with it actually right now because I've got something else set up on it. So if I click on text and I click here and I say email address, then it's going to make sure that it's got the @ sign and it's got a .com, .net, .org, whatever at the end. So it's going to make sure that it does. You can put in a custom error text here, which means that if it doesn't have those things that it's supposed to, if Google decides that that's not an email address, you can put in a little message that people get here. So this is very similar to what I had before, what I have down here for, let me keep going. How are you doing today in 1 to 3 words? I actually have a very fancy one set up. Oh my goodness, look at that. Does that make any sense to anyone? It doesn't make any sense to me. So this is actually just a plain old validation that's made a little bit fancy. So basically it's saying that I want it to match this formula. And the formula was that it had 1 to 3 words. If it had more than that, it would tell you in red, too many words, too many words. Go back and read the instructions, right? Too many words. You could even put that. Go back and read the instructions, right? So that is called validation, response validation. And that's super helpful if you need to get very specific with things. For instance, if you need to get someone's like personal email address, you have their wccusd.net address, that's fine. You know, you turned it on so that when they complete the form, it collects that information, but maybe you need a separate email address for them. Well, you want them to put the whole email address in so you can use it immediately, right? You don't want them to just put blah at Gmail and that's it. You want to make sure that it's actually an email. So what I've given you here are this is a link to rules for your forms, so how to set up response validation. And this is a link to really fancy data validation regular expression matches, which is what I used to get that counting the words thing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I got to tell you, if you give something like this to people and you ask them to fill out the text, sometimes they get really wordy. So if you want to really keep them, you know, limited with their words, use that. It really helps a lot. Okay, so I'm going to talk about branching forms now. So this is kind of a big deal, and it is probably one of the best things to do with a very complicated Google form that you're sending to a lot of people. And let me just show you how that works. So what you took was a branching form. Let me get out of here and get to the form itself. Okay. So this is a branching form. The question at the end of the very first section was what branched you out. Okay. So you have to make sure that that question is something that can be answered by a very specific answer. So it's got to be basically, it should be a multiple choice question. So I'm going to show you how I have this set up. All right, so this is section 1 of 4. So I'm going to bet that most of you have been creating forms that really only have one section. Using multiple sections is really best for creating branching forms, unless you just want to break it up so it's not so long. It doesn't really matter, right? If you're just asking a group of people all the same questions, then I would just put it all into one section and not worry about it, right? No big deal. They can scroll down and see how long it is. All right, so I asked some very simple questions. I gave you an example of multiple choice. I gave you an example of checkbox, the grids, gave you an example of this regular expression stuff. And then I ask you this question: do you like ice cream? It should have been, do you like cilantro? I know now, but so do you like ice cream? And the way that I have this set up, so I'm going to click on the question so you can see exactly how it's set up. So you're getting the behind the scenes here. So I have it set up so that you go to one, if you said yes, you like ice cream, you went to the ice cream fans section. If you said no, you went to the ice cream haters section. I know, I'm joking. You probably don't hate ice cream. Those of you who said no, you're probably just like whatever about ice cream. So that's the way I had it set up. And I'm going to show you in just a second how I did that. But the key is to think it through first. If that means that you are writing it down on a piece of paper and drawing pictures with arrows, or drawing, writing out your questions and then writing arrows in there, please do that. Think it through before you create a branching form. Not only that, and I'm going to say this over and over again today, you need to test that sucker out. Okay, do not send it out into the world. Don't send any form out into the world until you have tested it. And if you don't trust yourself, send it to your friend and have your friend test it. I'm really, really serious, because the other part of this is you want to go into the spreadsheet, right? That is created from the responses, and see if that's the kind of stuff, the kind of data that you can deal with. Because it's not, then you need to rewrite the form. Please, you got to think this through, right? You have to think through things like, do I want like basic data, which is yes or no questions, multiple choice questions, or do I want to get a little more complicated? Checkbox questions where they can put as many checks as they want. Those get a little more complicated. Okay. But you also get more specific information. So you really kind of have to think this through, right? So, and if any of you are teachers, this really is more for, you can use, Google Forms is great for quizzes. And Google Forms is great for creating really fancy branching quizzes. Okay. But you really want to think about things like, how does it look at the end? And you have to test it like crazy. Okay. So the do you like ice cream? You could either say yes, or you could say no. And so, but what I did beforehand is I set up my sections beforehand. So that's what I did first, right? I was like, okay, I want to have two sections. I want to have ice cream fans and I want to have ice cream haters. So I went ahead and set up my sections. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a new form so you can see exactly. I'm just going to forms.google.com, which means it's just going to randomly go into my drive, and that's fine. I'll find it later. My dog says hi. Okay, so all right, so let's say I'm going to create branching from this, and I'm going to say, do you like cilantro? Question mark. Do you notice it actually gives me a yes, no, maybe? So I can put yes and no. I don't want to put a maybe, because then I would have to have another section for that, or I'd have to choose for them yes or no. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead, and before I do all this other stuff, I'm going to go ahead and create my sections. This bar here these are all the things that I can add to the form, right? This is the last one is sections. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to call this cilantro lovers, and I'm going to create another section, and I'm going to call it cilantro haters. Okay, great. So now what I do, I've got my sections. I don't have to have any questions in those sections yet. I just want to make sure that I have the section set up. Okay, because I'm going to show you, this is what happens. I'm going back to my do you like cilantro question. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the kebab. Man, I tell you, the kebab is very powerful in Google Forms. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on go to section based on answer. Now, this is why I wanted to name my sections ahead of time, because otherwise it just says section 2, section 3, and if you don't have sections set up, it's going to be a real mess. So I'm going to click here on the arrow, and I'm going to say, okay, the yes, cilantro, they go to cilantro lovers, and these people go to cilantro haters. That's all I have to do to set that kind of thing up. That's it. Very simple, right? Of course, I don't have any questions in here, so the only thing that's going to show up in those sections is submit. But okay, great. I've got that part down. Let me go back to my example. Okay, so I had different questions for you, depending, right? If you said, yes, you liked ice cream, I wanted to know what's your favorite flavor. And I also wanted to know what kind of cone you liked, or no cone at all, right? Or if you were a ice cream in a cup person. And then I created another section called ice cream haters, and those people, I wanted to know what is their preferred sweet. So here's the thing. After this section, right? Let's say that you're an ice cream lover and you answered this question. By the way, red asterisk means that you have to answer that question. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down here. So now it says after section 2, you go to section 4, which was thank you. Now I set that up separately. Okay. You don't have to do that. You could instead make it so that the form just gets submitted, or they go to, actually it goes to another page that says submit form, which is fine. Not a problem. Okay. But I decided to make it a little funny with the cat video. All right, whatever. So that's your choice though. You can make, and this is actually a pretty simple branching form when it comes to things, because I actually asked a question with 2 answers. You pick one of those answers and you go to one of those. You can make this branch like crazy. If you want to get super complicated and you want to get specific information from specific people, you can totally do that. The other piece of this too is that you can just, like, I have done this before where I ask people at the very top, right? Did you read and do you understand blah, 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 blah? Yes or no? If they put no, then I can just dump them out of the form, right? That's it. So we've done software pilots where I have asked people, okay, so, you know, we're trying out securely. Your school is trying it out right now. So did you actually open it up and try it out? If they said no, I dumped them right out. Okay. I mean, it's submitted and something submitted for them, but all that was submitted was their email address and no. Okay. That's not a problem. And then the people who said yes, they got all the questions. So basically it's in some ways it's only bothering the people who need to be bothered, right, with these questions. So that's why branching forms are so incredibly cool. I love branching forms. They're very cool. Oh, and there's the video. The video is very funny. Okay. You can go back and watch that if you want. So I don't know if any of you noticed. So that's branching forms, basically. That can get super fancy and you know, crazy. That's all up to you. You can do whatever you want. Okay. So that's branching forms. Let me go back. The next thing I want to talk about is making things automatic. So a couple weeks ago when I did Google Sheets, advanced Google Sheets, I talked about using an add-on to make it so that it was like mail merge. It was a little bit like mail merge. This is similar to that, but it's a different add-on because it's a different application. So I'm going to go ahead. Let me go back here because there are some things I do want to go over. So the one thing, and I don't know if you noticed, and you probably didn't, you probably submitted the form and walked away. And came back here. That's fine. But you should have in your email, not the inbox, but the notification side or the update side, whatever it is. You should have an email that says, thank you for filling out the form. Okay. You should probably also have something from Google Forms saying this is what you submitted. So if you take a look at those 2 things, they look very different. One is just like a copy of everything that you put into the form. That's great. Love that. But then the other one is a little bit different and a little more personalized. Okay. Let me show you. Let's see. I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to go into my mail. And I'm going to show you what those look like. So this is a great way for people to know that they filled out your form, right? Okay. So from Google Forms, I got this. Oh, this is, by the way, this is the email that I get saying that I got responses and who they came from. Thankfully, it's all in one stream. Okay. So I'm not getting like crazy amounts of emails and different lines on my email. Okay. So there's that. Da, 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 da. So did I get rid of the other one? I must have dumped the other one. Okay. Oh no, this is it. Okay. So this is what you get when you fill out the form. And I put that you should get a response receipt. And I also put that you always get a response receipt. Now there's something there that you can say they can choose to get a response receipt. Don't do that. Just send it to them because they're going to want it, and they may have gone, oh, I didn't click, they didn't know to check the checkbox. Okay, whatever. I just send it to them. No harm, no foul, right? So here's everything that I answered. This is when I was testing it. Okay. The other thing that you got, hopefully, and I may have dumped it out of here, but that was dumb. It would have come from me, and I'm not seeing it right now. Oh, here it is. No, that's not it. Okay. I will show you from my drive instead. Because when I set this up as the creator of the form, I get to see all of them. So these can be used for certificates of completion. But this is what it looks like. Open. That's not good. They're in here somewhere. They're in this other one. Can anyone say whether or not they got one? They should have gotten one. Should be my examples. Chris got one. She's nodding. Okay, great. Oh, here it is. I put it elsewhere. So here it is. And the cool thing is, do you see it says names? So whatever you put into the first name, I asked what your first name was. Chris put her whole name. That's cool, Chris. It's Chris Moore. She's not just Chris, right? Okay. So I also added in things like, how you're doing today. And if you're offered ice cream, you say yes, right? So I only pulled certain answers. And that's cool too. But this is a really great way to send something to someone for filling it out, right? It could be a thank you. It could be a certificate of completion. I've used it for that as well. It could be further information. So it could be like, okay, after you give me your information, then I'll give you this other information, right? So you can use it as like, I got to get your information and here's your reward, whatever that was. Okay. So this is how this works. So I'm going to go through this. And I'm going to show you from here. Okay. I already have the add-on. Where do I find my add-ons? Add-ons are up in the upper right-hand corner. So there are a few things going on up here. I'm going to go over it really quickly. Here are the settings. That's where you set up whether or not someone is going to get a response receipt. The eyeball is a preview. So when you click on this, it opens up a whole other tab with your form. And there's also the URL for that you can send to people, right? This is customizing the theme. So that's where you make it pretty. You can add a picture, you can change the color, whatever. This is add-ons. Now, don't freak out. I've got several add-ons. I have an add-on problem. So let me click here. It's called Form Publisher. In the slide deck, I have given you the actual link to the Form Publisher. It goes straight to the Google Shop or whatever they're calling it now. They keep changing it. But it goes straight there to that page, and you can click on Install, and it will go to your forms. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Form Publisher because what happens is I already have it set up. Okay. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's a lot of stuff. I'm going to say this over and over again. If you set something like this up, you need to test it yourself. Please test it, because don't set something up, put it out in the world and think that it's working. Don't ever do that with forms. Ever, ever, ever. You need to test everything when you do forms, especially when you're first starting out, or if you're just starting out with fancy things in forms. You need to check that out. So the first thing that's listed, these are all the things that I already did earlier today, so that lovely little thing with me and the monkeys shows up. Okay. So the template, that's what you actually want to set that up first. So I'm going to show you my template. So I set this up first. So again, this is some pre-thinking you got to do, right? Because I know that I have to set it up with what are called tags. So I put in the words I wanted, the text that I wanted, and then I put in the tags. The tags have these double bracket things around them. Okay. I guess those aren't really brackets. We'll call them brackets for now. So you put the brackets around them. They have to be the exact same thing that's in your form or it doesn't work. I mean, exact, down to spacing, capitalization or not, whether or not you put a colon, all of those things. It has to be exact. So for instance, this one right here, this is how I ask the question. How are you doing today, comma, in 1 to 3 words, ... I have to make sure that I add in that ... or the system doesn't know to look there. Okay. So you got to make it easier on this thing. Otherwise it will not work at all. So there are times when I open up the form on one screen and I open up the my template on the other, and I just copy and paste, right? Copy from the form exactly what the question says and then paste it in. Copy and paste so that it works exactly. Because what happens is when you set up the form publisher is it's going to ask you very specifically, right? It's going to say, all right, we found these tags. We found this other tag that's not going to work. Right? It will tell you exactly. So it's kind of nice to have it set up so that it'll probably work first, so that you're not having to go through and do a lot of debugging. If you were in the advanced or the next steps of Google Sheets, you heard me talk about debugging, which is basically when you test something out, it doesn't work, you got to go back and fix it. That's debugging. So again, this is something you have to test out and try it out. Now, what's really nice about this whole thing is that as soon as you turn in the form, within a minute or so, you got this email. And so that though has, again, you have to make sure that it's set up so that you're somehow getting that person's email. If you're not getting that person's email, you have nowhere to send it. So please keep that in mind. The cool thing too about the output is that I actually sent it, I think I sent it to you as a PDF, although I'm not sure, I may have shared it with you. So you can also share something as view only, or you can share it as a PDF. The difference is that PDFs are easier to print. That's really the only difference, you know. So, all right. So now, what time is it? 2:21. I've gone over time. Okay. There aren't many of you in here today. So I want to know I'm going to ask for questions now. You can go ahead and unmute and ask your questions. David, is it set up or did you mess with it so that can they unmute or not?
It is a free for all.
Oh, it's a free for all. Excellent. So if you want to ask a question, you can, or if you want to go ahead and I have this. So what I did was I shared with you, and if you get into the, I'm going to put into the chat, I'm going to put the link to this so you can get into it now. All right. On the last slide, if you don't have any questions, what I did was I gave you the form, the same form as a copy. So when you click on this here, let me show you what happens. It comes to this. So what you do is you click on make a copy and it puts a copy right into, it's your own copy It goes right into your Google Drive. And what I suggest you do, and this is the best way to learn Google Forms. I actually like it when people like send me things and I can make copies and start messing with them and deconstructing them, is you want to look at the way that the form is set up in terms of it being branching, okay? Or whatever it was that you were interested in. It could be the multiple choice grid. It could be the checkbox grid. Check out the way that the form is set up and deconstruct it to understand. Take it apart. That's yours. You can go ahead and make it up. You can, and then like, if you screwed it up beyond recognition and you're like, I don't know what I did, you can go and make another copy. Okay. Or you can make 2 copies, have them sit side by side, mess really badly with one of them, see what happens, right? Remember, the eyeball is your friend. Click on the eyeball to see a preview of your form. And that's actually your real live form. So clicking on the eyeball and copying that URL and sending that URL is totally fine. You can do that. That's one way of sending a form. All right. Do you have any questions? That was a lot. Oh boy. No questions?
I do.
Oh, good.
Can you please, this is Marilyn. Can you please tell me again, why do I need to do ... after the question?
So it's because that's the way I wrote the question to begin with. You don't have to have questions like that, right? It's just that whatever I put into that template, right, with the brackets around it, it has to exactly match whatever's in the form. So you'll probably do the form first. You don't have to use those ... You just have to make sure that all the capitalization and the spacing and all that other stuff that you have in the form matches exactly in the template, or that whole thing is not going to work at all. That is a tough lesson to learn sometimes, because you think you're going crazy. Seriously, you think you're doing it right. The best way to do it though is to copy and paste.